We've been taking a look at Abraham and Sarah and their descendants this summer. And so we've gotten quite a ways. Abraham and Sarah had Isaac. Isaac got married to Rebekah. And in today's story, they have children, two children, Jacob and Esau, born basically at the same time, although technically Esau was firstborn. And back then, that means a lot of extra privileges that the other children don't partake in because he is the firstborn. But as we will see, as you've already seen in this story, there's a lot of dysfunction in this family, as the brothers obviously aren't getting along, and we're told that the parents have their favorites, and they show it in the way that they treat their children. And so there's a lot of dysfunction to go around. Now, Jacob and Esau, they are nothing alike. You know, Esau is kind of the stereotypical male. He likes to be outside and do outdoor type things. He loves to hunt, and just kind of, as you can tell from the story, he wears himself out. He just loves being outside so much. Jacob, on the other hand, he's not really into that kind of stuff. He likes to stay indoors, and so they're just night and day difference from one another. And we don't know the whole story. You know, we just get snippets. We get snapshots. It may be that they've always kind of clashed. It may be that they never really got along because of those differences. There's always somewhat of a natural sibling rivalry. But then in addition, when you throw in the favoritism thing, that makes it even worse. And so they are not getting along. There are two parts to this story, and there's no way that I could really fit the whole story into scripture readings this morning. But so we just did little snippets of them. And in the first part of the story, Esau is out hunting as usual, and he just wears himself out. So he comes back and he is just famished. I mean, he is just starving. He needs something to replenish his energy. And he comes back and he smells this stew, and it just smells amazing. You know how stuff smells better the more you're hungry, right? And so it just smells wonderful. And so he asks for some of this stew that Jacob happens to have ready. And Jacob says, yeah, I'll give you some stew if you give me your birthright. And Esau's like, okay, you know, I'm going to die here today if I don't eat, so what good is a birthright to me if I'm dead? You know, he's dramatic. And so he agrees to this exchange, and the transaction is made, and he has his stew. That's a pretty short story, pretty simple, but we learn something about these two. For Esau, we learn that he is short-sighted, right? He's willing to give up his birthright in exchange for one meal, which he was probably going to get a meal anyway, some way. But he gives up his birthright. Now, for those of us, we're not really too familiar with birthrights per se because we don't really say it like that. But in those days, the firstborn would usually get a double share of the inheritance compared to everyone else. There were perks to being the firstborn. And so this was a big deal, but for Esau, evidently, maybe his father's death seemed a long ways off. He didn't see the point for it. We don't know. But he gave it up. And of course, Jacob made him swear to it first. It wasn't good enough to just say, okay. He says, swear to it. So he doesn't want him to go back on his word. So we learned something about Esau. We also learned something about Jacob. And that is that he's cunning, he's manipulative, and he's a planner. And we don't know how much of this was planned. I doubt that he just came up with it. Oh, hey, what about your birthright? I'm guessing he probably planned this. To what extent, we don't know. Was he making the stew just for this case, or did he happen to be making it? Either way, we know that he is sly. And so this does not help their relationship any. Well, that was the first part of the story, but we fast forward. We're not, it's quite a bit of time later. Isaac, their father, is old. He's nearly blind or completely blind. And so he knows that death is coming. It's not imminent per se, but he knows that it's coming near. And so now is the time to give his blessing. This was another thing that was common in those days, is that the father would give a blessing to his children. Sometimes fathers would give blessings to all of their children. In this story, it seems as though he's reserving all of his blessings for his favorite son, Esau. And so he tells Esau to go out and to go hunt and get some food so that he can enjoy this meal, and then he will give him his blessing. So Esau goes out to go hunting, and Isaac's wife, Rebekah, she hears this. She hears what Isaac said to him. And she has a dilemma. Because she has been told by God, oftentimes so far God is speaking to the men, but God spoke to Rebekah in this story and tells her that Jacob is the one through whom the promise of God, the covenant of God, will continue. Again, not that God doesn't work through other people too, but God is specifically for this purpose is going to work through Jacob's family line. And so Rebekah feels that Jacob has to have the blessing. Otherwise, it's not going to work. Right? Jacob's not going to be able to carry on the covenant of God if he's not blessed by his father. That's what she believes. And so she comes up with this trickery, this plan, this scheme that she gets her son in on. It's her idea, And so they're both complicit, she and Jacob. They're both complicit. But he was told by his mother to do this, and he protested, and nonetheless she convinced him. So the plan is that Jacob is going to pretend to be his brother Esau. So he's going to dress like Esau so that when his almost blind father feels him, he feels like Esau. He smells like Esau. And maybe their voices were similar, I don't know. But Jacob pretends to be his brother and brings food that his mom had prepared. And so their father blesses him thinking it's Esau. Well, just like a soap opera, no sooner does Jacob leave, but Esau comes back in with his food. And now Isaac shakes because he realizes that something is not right here. Because when he realizes it's Esau, he says, well, then who was it who just came in here? Because I gave him a blessing, and he shall be blessed. You see, it was believed that when a father gave a blessing to their children, it was kind of like it directed the future, almost determines the future for a person. And so he says, I've given the blessing, and basically it can't be revoked. I've done this. And Esau's just enraged, and he says, me too, Father, surely you have a blessing. No, I'm sorry, I gave everything to Jacob, thinking he was you. And so Esau is just, he is just enraged. Probably all of this conflict that's been building up through the years between he and Jacob has reached a boiling point now, and he looks back in the past and he says, he took my birthright, and now he's taken my blessing, and isn't he named Jacob for a reason? Because he's a deceiver. And so he gets so mad, hate fills his heart, and he decides that when the period of mourning is over, he's going to kill him. He's going to kill Jacob. You see, back then when somebody died, there was a prescribed period of mourning. Oftentimes it was 30 days. And have you ever had the passing of a loved one that seems like in just a few days everything goes back to normal and the world moves on, and it's like, hey, wait a minute, what happened here? Well, back then the world didn't just go back to normal in a few days. There was a prescribed time. It seems weird to us, but oftentimes it's like 30 days or something, where people kind of stopped what they were doing and mourned with those who lost their loved ones. And so Esau said, when this period is over, I'm going to get him. Well, Rebekah hears this too. She must hear a lot. And so she hears him say this, and so she says, we got to do something, Jacob. I don't want to lose both of you. Esau's really filled with hate, and now I don't want this to happen. And so she tells Jacob to head off to her brother. This story in Genesis really goes back and forth between Haran and Canaan, the promised land, because we were just back in Haran last week when Abraham's servant found Isaac a wife, which was Rebekah. And now she's sending her son Jacob back to Haran to spend some time with her brother, his uncle, Laban, until Esau's fury subsides. Who knows how long it'll be. Turns out to be decades. So Jacob leaves. There are certain parts of the Bible that are dry. This is not one of them. These are some of the stories that we like to read, filled with drama and intrigue. But what shall we say about Rebekah and her method? Now, Jacob and Rebekah, like I said, were both complicit. And she's the one who came up with it and kind of drafted Jacob to take part. And Jacob was, even though he protested, you know him, right? He's a schemer. So he was more than happy to take part. But when they do this, what do we think of Rebecca? Well, the question is, do the ends justify the means? Are her methods, was it worth it? Now, it depends partially on what you believe. If you believe that the Father's blessing determines their future, and no doubt Rebecca believed that, then it is indeed necessary to do anything possible to get Jacob the blessing, right? So that the covenant can continue through Jacob. But the other question we have to ask ourselves is that the only way God could have worked? Did God need Jacob to receive the blessing of his father in order for his covenant to be carried out through him? Or could God have done it even if Esau got the blessing? I kind of tend to think that God could have done it somehow anyway. I don't know. But I kind of tend to think that God could have done it. Why didn't Rebecca talk to Isaac? If she knew that the covenant was supposed to be through Jacob, why didn't she talk to him? Perhaps she did. Perhaps they've had this conversation. And perhaps he's just determined Esau's his favorite and Esau's the one who's going to get the blessing. Or maybe it was just such that that's something that you don't do, depending on the culture. Either way, she felt that she couldn't talk to him about it or she wasn't getting through to him, and so she decided she had to act. She had to do something. So in a way, she's to be commended. I mean, there's no doubt that her method was dishonorable and it lacked integrity, right? I mean, it just did. But in a way, she's to be commended for taking the initiative and doing what she felt needed to be done so that Jacob could get the blessing. Now, I wonder if she ever looked back on that and thought, did I do the right thing? Did I act too quickly? Should I have waited on God? Did I do the right thing? Because it caused this rift in our two sons where they had to live in different places for around 20 years. Did I do the right thing? Those are not easy questions to answer. And it's the age-old question, when to act and when not to act. Last week we looked at what is the will of God and how do we discern the will of God. Related to this is when do we act and when do we wait. Where we have different situations in life, and there are some situations where we really need to act because if we wait too long, then something bad is going to happen and we need to act. And then there are other situations in life where we really shouldn't do anything, we just need to wait and wait on God's timing, wait for God to act or whatever. But how do you know which is which? And how do you know what the right timing is? Because, you might be thinking to yourself, well, gee, should I do something or should I wait? Is God going to work independently of me or is God going to work through me? How do I figure this out? And there's not a lot of clear-cut answers in life as to what to do. There is one guide, though, and that is that most of the time, in order to, in any situation, to carry out God's will, we're not going to have to do something that's dishonoring to somebody else. Now there are sometimes, I say usually because we live in a broken world, the easiest example that you can think of is if somebody is breaking into your house and they're threatening the lives of your family. You may have to do something that dishonors or hurts someone. And that's, you wish you didn't have to do that, and it's unfortunate, but because we live in a broken world, sometimes those things are unavoidable. But usually, there is a way that we can act that still honors others and honors our own self. And so if you're in a situation where you're just itching to act, you feel like you just need to do something, anything, and yet the only thing you can think of is something that's not very godly, then maybe, I don't know, but maybe wait a little bit. Just wait and see if God acts in some other way. Maybe there's another way. But those questions are hard to answer. They're things that we don't know for sure. It's really contextual. It really depends on the situation. Now, as I said, for Rebecca and Jacob, Rebecca was sure that she knew God's will because God had told her. Literally, God had told her that Jacob was the one that he was going to work with through the covenant through. And she knew in her mind that meant he needed to receive the blessing. Those were two convictions that she had. Therefore, she acted based on what she knew or thought she knew. Did she look back in the past and wonder if she did the right thing? Maybe. Maybe. I don't know. And there are going to be times in your life when you think you're pretty sure that you know the will of God. And you're pretty sure you know what has to be done in order for that to take place. Maybe you've already been in those situations, and then you look back now and you say, did I do the right thing? Should I have waited? Did I do it wrong? Did I do it at the wrong time? And we can spend a lot of time doing that. We can spend a lot of time living in the past, looking at our past situations, past decisions that we've made, and we can ask ourselves those what if questions. What if I had waited on God? Or what if I really shouldn't have waited and I should have done something and God would have worked through me and I just was too afraid? You can ask yourself so many questions. You can drive yourself nuts asking yourself all these questions, and you're going to be living in the past. We can do the same thing when it comes to the future. When it's about the future, it's called worry. When it's about the past, it's called regret. When it's about the future, it's called worry. But we can ask the same questions. What am I going to do a year from now when X comes up, whatever it is? Am I going to act? How am I going to act? What am I going to do? When am I going to do it? We can drive ourselves crazy thinking about the past and the future, and we can completely miss the present. And so I would like to encourage you to know that, first of all, with the situation with Isaac and Rebekah's family, God worked through their situation. God worked through, and we have 2 more weeks in this series, and we're going to be focusing on Jacob's story for the next 2 weeks. And we're going to see that God works through them, both Jacob and Esau, and that good things do come. Some good things that wouldn't have happened otherwise. And so we're going to see that even in those situations, there's no point in looking back and filling yourself with regret. If you tried to do the right thing and maybe you second guessing whether that was the right thing, just know that if you make a mistake, it's not the end of the world for one thing. God can still work through you and through those situations. Even when we think that there's no way, God can still work through those situations. So keep encouraged and know that God is with you, even if you act too soon or act too late. We want to do the best we can. That's all we can do. And remember to not spend so much time in the past that you're filled with regret, or so much time in the future that you're filled with worry, that you miss out on